chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications. The following program is a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts Network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com to learn more about this and our other weekly storytelling programs. Thank you for listening, and enjoy the show.
Good evening. I'm storyteller Otis Jiry, and I ain't your grandfather. From where I'm from, we don't do bedtime stories. And if that's what you were expecting, you're in the wrong place. If it's terrifying tales you're after, well then, I've got just the thing. Get comfortable, settle in, turn off the lights, if you dare. Your night is about to get a whole lot darker. Who needs sleep anyway?
Good evening! You're listening to Scary Stories Told in the Dark. Welcome, dear listeners, to Season 16, Episode 4. I'm your host, Otis Jiry, and here as well is my neighbor, Malcolm Blackwood.
Hello, dear listeners. I hope you are well this evening.
And in this episode, we'll be performing 5 tales to terrify you, courtesy of authors N.M. Brown, Seth Paul, Kyle Harrison, Craig Groshek, and Hyde Price. Tonight we'll hear stories of hellish hunts, dastardly dares, shocking seances, truculent terrors, and unwanted invitees. You're listening to the standard edition of tonight's program, which contains the first 3 spine-tingling stories. If you'd like to show your support and enjoy an extended version of this and other episodes with twice the terror, visit simplyscarypodcast.com and click Patrons in the upper menu to sign up today. Thank you for your support.
Your support is most deeply appreciated, and nothing warms our cold, unknowing hearts quite so much as providing more terror than you can take in one sitting.
Now, it's time to take a walk together down the moonlit trail, so lock your doors, turn your lights down low, and settle in. The show is about to begin. Well, hello, neighbor. I wasn't expecting you to stop by so early. I'm still putting up a few decorations. 'Tis the season, you know.
Indeed it is. I need to begin my decorations myself. I have to stop by the local cemetery to find just the right items, you see.
Well, in that case, I recommend the one over near 3rd Street. Tends to be safer. The dead are a lot more restful in that part of town.
Good advice. But you do still share a story or two at this time of year. I can't imagine any time more deserving than this.
Indeed. There's nothing quite like the Halloween season with all those hayrides, haunted houses, will-o-wisps leading people into that old swamp at the rear of town, and those jack-o'-lanterns you see floating on Main Street.
Floating? There's a parade of some kind?
Nope.
Oh, maybe they're just looking to follow you home then. In any case, if you don't mind, I'd love to sit down and share a story or two.
Okay, then. Let's start this number from N.M. Brown. This time of year is hunting season in a lot of areas of the country, and there are many traditions passed down at these times, but for one family, that tradition can be a bit extreme. Without further ado, I present to you Hallows Eve Hunt. My father received the call at 4:18 a.m. The shrill piece of the cell phone rang throughout the entire upstairs of the house like a siren's call. Dad always hated sleeping with his door closed, but because my mother insisted on sleeping naked, he was often left with no choice. Now that it was just the two of us, I was surprised he didn't remove the door to his room from the hinges entirely. Needless to say, we both found ourselves shocked awake by the unexpected call. I only heard him say a few words. What happened? And for how long? Followed by a soft, quaking, "Good Christ." If the words weren't enough, the solemnity of his tone let me know that whatever happened wasn't good at all, and this was likely to affect us both. Granddad's road to recovery wouldn't be a smooth one, but we'd get there. After the accident, he spent nearly a month in the hospital, a place he hated almost as much as getting old. It was strange seeing him laid up like that, his body a tangle of wires and tubes, his once powerful frame reduced to something fragile and diminished. I started visiting him on the weekends, making the drive out to the rehabilitation center just to sit by his side for an hour or two. Most of the time, he just stared out the window, his gaze far away and hollow. The nurses said it was common after a bad fall, but it looked like something deeper had occurred within him. He was mentally gearing up for something, though I had no idea what. There were days when he hardly would say a word, his face twisted in pain as he tried and failed to shift in his hospital bed. I'd watch him, not knowing what to say, the silence between us growing heavier with every visit. I'd make small talk, telling him about school, friends, whatever nonsense I thought might break through that iron wall of stubborn silence he'd built around himself. Occasionally, he'd grunt or nod, but mostly he just sat there, lost in his own world. But then there were the good days, too. Days when I'd walk into his room and find him sitting up, cursing the doctors under his breath for making him stay another damn day. He'd smile at me then, a tight, fleeting thing, but it was there. On those days, I'd listen as he ranted and raved about the old times, about all the things he still planned to do once I let him go. He talked about rebuilding the old hunting cabin, expanding the property, maybe even buying some horses again. His eyes would light up with that old spark, and for a moment, it was like he was back. Like the granddad I knew hadn't abandoned us after all. Sometimes I'd just sit beside him, staring at that same patch of sky he seemed to find so fascinating, letting the quiet stretch between us. He'd never been one for heartfelt talks or emotional confessions, but I think he appreciated the company. He glanced over at me every so often, like he was making sure I was still there, and then he'd sigh softly, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. We didn't need to say much. Being there was enough. Then, just as the weather started to turn cold, Dad pulled me aside one evening after dinner. His expression was lighter than it had been in months, a rare flicker of relief in his eyes. "Just got off the phone with the rehab center," he said, a faint smile on his lips. "Your grandpop's back to his old self. Gave the physical therapist an earful this morning and tried to walk out without clearance. Hell, nearly succeeded, too." Dad chuckled, shaking his head. "They're thinking of discharging him next week if he keeps it up." A sense of hope swelled in my chest, warming me from the inside out. Grandpop was tough, tougher than anyone I knew. If anyone could claw their way back from something like that, it was him. But as Dad turned away, I caught a flicker of something. Just a shadow in his eyes, gone almost as soon as it appeared. A warning, maybe. or doubt. Whatever it was, he didn't say anything more, but looking back now, I wonder if he already knew. If he'd seen the signs of the change stirring in Grandpop even then. Because while my grandfather was certainly feeling more like himself again, I think we all missed the fact that maybe it wasn't the same self coming back. As October neared its end, the time for the annual hunting trip was upon the men in the family. Honestly, I should have spoken up then. I should have questioned if we should go ahead with it, with Grandpa just having been in the hospital not that long ago. But I didn't. I didn't say a word, because this year was the first year I'd been invited along. It felt like a ritualistic gathering as the men in my family surrounded the table at the center of the cabin's main room. My Uncle Jacob approached the massive slab of oak first, his frame casting a long shadow across the faded family crest carved into the surface. He motioned to the others with his left hand, signaling for them to form a line. I took my newly rightful place at the end, though my intrigue and excitement made me wish I was much further ahead. The air was thick with an almost tangible anticipation, as if the very walls of the cabin knew something momentous was about to happen. The eldest of the men in the family got their first crack at the artillery cabinet, each taking a rifle best suited for their individual preferences and skill sets. My father surprised me by nudging my shoulder during his turn, motioning that he wanted me to pick up instead. Now, I had taken rifle and archery courses during a summer camp when I was 12, but that was a long time ago. Besides that, the closest I came was playing shooter video games, and holding a firearm in your hands and pushing triggers on an Xbox controller were two totally different things. But, doing the best I could, I was lucky enough to choose a weapon that no one really had anything to say about. Uncle Benny chose last, begrudgingly so, in fact, and I wasn't sure if it was because he got last choice or didn't wish to be involved in the tradition at all. His movements were sad, resigned almost. He trailed behind the rest of us as we headed off toward the path to the hunting grounds. My father and I landed somewhere in the middle, with both the family behind us and in front of us. My question was innocent enough at first, something to ponder on while we passed the time walking. "Dad," I asked, my voice cutting through the murmur of the men, "why aren't Aunt Jeannie and Sarah invited?" His gaze was cold, the type of look that turned my stomach into knots. "Well, I know it doesn't make much sense, but it's just safer this way." "Safer?" I echoed, incredulous. "Are we afraid the women will shoot better or what? Seems sexist. I don't mean to be an asshole, Dad, but still. Look, it's not just safe for them, all right?" He interrupted, voice terse. "There are all kinds of animals out here. If one of them was out here during her bleed, God knows the type of animals we would attract." I nodded in agreement, but honestly, what I wanted to do was laugh. Did he really think a deer or a hog would come running through the woods, hell-bent on attacking someone because they were on their period? A single shot rang through the air, gathering our attention faster than the bullet fired ever could. My Uncle Benny lowered the pistol gingerly into my grandfather's hands before settling at his sides. "Listen," Grandpa bellowed, his voice betraying the fragility of his age. His arms rose to the sky, allowing his cane to fall freely into the dirt. He looked like a man possessed, his frail frame trembling with energy I had never seen before. "Family," he began, "when your grandmother and I started this family all these long years ago, we didn't know what our future would hold, And we definitely didn't expect there to be so damn many of you. He laughed, and we all followed suit, thankful for the moment of levity. But in that time, we managed to give our children good lives. Good enough to where they could, in return, give their children good lives. When she died, the bit of my heart went with her. My Imogene's been in heaven looking down on us, all while she anticipates my imminent arrival, and I don't intend to keep her waiting much longer. He paused, allowing the words to settle. Uncle Benny scooped up his cane and handed it back to him. Well, now, with all that out of the way, I'll get to the heart of the matter. The reason we've gathered here today. It's no secret that the men of our family have hunted for generations. It's something that's always brought us great joy. And this one will be a little different, as it will sadly be my last. But for one of you... He paused again, his gaze sweeping over each of us, locking eyes for just a moment. One of your lives will be changed forever. There are only two constants in this world of ours, life and death. I've known I would die for a long time now, and have used that time wisely to save and invest. I'm fortunate enough to leave behind my home, land, vehicles, and enough money for one of you to live comfortably forever. One of us? I wondered. He cleared his throat. With Imogene, her affairs were already put into place before her passing. Mine, however, will be a little different. I did not assign anyone specific because it's up to one of you to decide it for me. All you have to do is win this hunt. The winner will automatically gain access to the metaphorical key to my castle, along with all the cash I've saved, stocks, and the gain from investments that have paid off in the past. A murmur of voices broke out, confusion and disbelief swirling through the group. But before any of us could object, a dark smile spread across Grandpa's face. I should mention, this isn't your usual hunt, Grandpa murmured, his eyes glittering with something both fierce and settling. And no, I don't just mean because it's Hallows Eve. This year, man will hunt man in the biggest hunt of your lives. My heart pounded, 1,000 questions crashing through my skull all at once. What was happening? What did Grandpa mean? Man against man? Who were we hunting? Was it some dangerous game? Something illegal? But why the secrecy? Why the bizarre tension that crackled in the air between us, like electricity ready to ignite? What exactly are we hunting, Grandpa? I asked, voice shaking despite my effort to keep it steady. He turned to me then, eyes softening, and the expression on his face was something I hadn't seen before. Something akin to sorrow, mingled with a deep, almost painful pride. He reached out, placing a hand on my shoulder, the touch heavy with unspoken words. I glanced at my dad, expecting him to intervene, to ask what the hell was going on. But he just looked away, jaw clenched tight. You're hunting me, son, Grandpa said gently, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the rising tide of panic swelling in my chest. Everything inside me froze. The world seemed to tip sideways, my thoughts spiraling in a frantic whirl. Hunting him? I shook my head, swallowing hard, but the words didn't make any more sense, no matter how many times I tried to process them. The words hit me like a blow to the chest, knocking the breath out of me. What did he mean? Commotion swept through the group like wildfire, our stunned silence quickly morphing into a low murmur of disbelief and unease. I looked around, expecting to see the same wide-eyed shock in my uncles' and cousins' faces. But what I saw instead made my stomach churn. Resignation. The older men, Dad, Uncle Jacob, even Uncle Benny, shifted uncomfortably but didn't speak up. Like they knew. They knew. You can't. What are you talking about? I stammered, looking desperately at the other men. This is a Halloween trick, right? We're not actually. But their faces were grim, eyes downcast or flickering toward Grandpa, with a mix of reverence and something else. Something darker. Uncle Benny nodded once, slow and deliberate, as if this whole insane idea was perfectly reasonable. I know it's a shock, boy, and I'm sorry for that, Grandpa continued, squeezing my shoulder. But this is how it's always been. Every generation, the oldest passes the mantle this way. It's an honor, privilege, for the one chosen to inherit, and for the one like me. He smiled, but it was sad, the lines around his eyes deepening. I'm proud to offer myself up. Pride to die knowing that my successor will be one of you. Someone I love. Someone I trust. The air left my lungs in a rush, and I staggered back a step, the room spinning. This couldn't be real. It was sick. Wrong. But Grandpop just stood there, his gaze steady and resolute as if he'd already accepted his fate. You want us to kill you? I breathed, the words tasting like ash on my tongue. No, boy, he corrected softly, shaking his head. Not want, need. It's the way of things. And I couldn't think of a better death than being brought down by someone strong enough to shoulder the burden of this family, someone worthy. Worthy of what? I demanded, my voice rising despite myself. The idea of hunting Grandpop, of chasing him through the woods like some goddamn animal, was obscene. But no one else seemed to share my outrage. The other men shifted awkwardly, but their silence was damning. Grandpop's expression turned serious. Of everything I've built, of everything that comes with what I'm leaving behind, my estate, my wealth, and the responsibility. What responsibility? I demanded. But he ignored the question, turning his attention to the group at large. It's my time, he announced, voice steady. I've lived a long, full life. Longer than most of you will, if I'm being honest. He smiled faintly. But I'm not dying on my back. I'm not wasting away in a bed surrounded by weeping kin. I'm going out the way I lived. On my feet. Facing the world head on. And I'm passing the torch to one of you. To whoever has the strength to take it. The other men nodded, some with grim acceptance, others with a flash of something like hunger in their eyes. And that's when it hit me. They were going to do it. They were really going to hunt him like some twisted rite of passage. For the wealth, the power, for the inheritance. This isn't right, I whispered, shaking my head. We can't just... Can't just what? Grandpop interrupted sharply, his gaze pinning me in place. Let an old man choose the way he dies? You'd deny me that, boy? You think you know better than me what's right or wrong for my life? The words hit me like a punch in the gut. He was serious. Deadly serious. And worse, he wanted this. He wanted us to do it. But why? I whispered, voice trembling. Why like this? Grandpa sighed, the fight leaving his shoulders as he slumped slightly, leaning heavier on his cane. Because there's more to this family than you understand, son. More than money or land. There's a duty that comes with what I've built. And only the one who proves they can bear the weight of taking my life is fit to carry that duty forward. Duty? I echoed numbly. What are you talking about? But he didn't answer. Instead, he stepped back, straightening, his gaze sweeping over the gathered men one last time. I know this isn't easy. I know it's a lot to ask. But it's necessary. This is how our family survives, how we endure. You've all been strong, brave, and loyal. I'm proud of every single one of you. He turned, locking eyes with me. But there can only be one heir, one leader. And I'll be damned if it's not someone who understands the price of what they're taking. What if no one wants to? I choked up, desperation clawing at my throat. Grandpa just smiled, sad and serene. Then I'll die on my feet alone. But I don't think that's going to happen, boy. You've got the blood in you, the fire. And if I have to die to bring it out, then that's a death I'll be proud of. A death that means something. He looked around, meeting each set of eyes in turn. You all know the rules. You all know what it's at stake. It's time, boys. Let's see who has the strength to take it. And then he turned and walked out of the cabin, leaving us standing there, stunned and horrified, and already calculating, already hunting. The forest, alive with the colors of autumn, felt like a trap as we split up. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, twisting and curling at the edge of my vision, and the Halloween air buzzed with a tension that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. That's when it started. The gunfire. First, a single, isolated shot, followed by a scream, high-pitched and desperate. The sound of feet crunching through dead leaves erupted in a flurry of chaos. A second shot cracked through the trees, then a third, each accompanied by more shouts. My Uncle Bobby staggered into view, clutching his side. Crimson bloomed beneath his flannel, spreading like an inkblot on paper. He looked up, eyes wide, just as another shot rang out. His head snapped back and he crumpled to the ground, blood trickling from the gaping wound between his eyes. "No!" I shouted, rushing forward, but it was too late. The shooter stepped into the clearing. My cousin, Richard, rifle still raised at where his father stood seconds before. His face was twisted with something savage, something dark. He lowered the gun, eyes locking into mine. "It's you or me, kid," he snarled. "Richard, what the hell are you?" A snarl erupted from somewhere behind me, the roar reverberating through my bones. Richard's eyes widened, and before it could even turn, something massive slammed into me, sending me sprawling. The beast was on top of me, its weight crushing, teeth flashing as it snapped its jaws inches from my face. I screamed, shoving it back with everything I had. Its fur was coarse beneath my hands, bristling like steel wool. One of its claws raked across my chest, tearing through my shirt and skin in a blaze of agony. And then, as it lunged again, its teeth scraped against my arm. Just a graze, but the pain that followed was like fire. I kicked out, adrenaline surging, and managed to roll free. The beast turned its attention to Richard, who stood frozen in shock. "Run!" I shouted, but he didn't move. The creature lunged, jaws closing around his neck. There was a sickening crunch, and then Richard's body went limp. I scrambled to my feet, clutching my arm. The wound pulsed, heat radiating from the scrape. But I didn't have time to think about it. I took off, sprinting through the trees, the sound of carnage echoing behind me. The forest erupted into chaos. Gunfire, screams, and the guttural growls of the beast filled the air. I stumbled upon Uncle Benny next, his body torn open, ribs gleaming white against the red ruin of his chest. A few yards away, my father fought off Uncle Jacob, my uncle, the two of them grappling for control of a rifle. "You're not taking this from me, Jack," Jacob roared, slamming the butt of the rifle into Dad's face. Blood sprayed and Dad staggered, but he didn't fall. "Enough!" I screamed, but it was like they couldn't even hear me. Like none of this was real. A nightmare unfolding in front of my eyes. My dad fired a bullet that took out the side of Jacob's neck, spurting blood, sinew flapping as he fell to the ground. His eyes remained open for just a few moments before he died, just long enough to fire a shot toward my father from the ground, hitting him between the stomach and chest. Before long, I was the only one standing, the only one left breathing. And through it all, the beast watched. Its eyes, Grandpop's eyes, glowed in the shadows, tracking my every move. It began to approach me, its plodding footsteps slow and gentle. The creature bared its teeth at me but refused to charge like it did earlier. A roar resonated from deep in its throat as it stood on its hind legs, exposing the most vulnerable areas. The thought occurred to me that this was a sentient choice. Somewhere deep inside, my grandfather wanted me to be the one to win. So, I raised my eye to the scope, took the shot, and won. It's been a year since that day. A year since the hunt. The money came through, the property transferred just like Grandpa promised. For a while, I thought it was all going to be okay. More than okay, really. Life felt good. Better than it had in years. The changes started off small, subtle things that could easily be overlooked. I moved into the old house in the hill, the sprawling estate my grandfather had loved so much, with its wide verandas and endless acres of dead woodland. The land was pristine, the kind of place you'd only see in real estate catalogs or movies about the American dream. There was even a private lake ringed by tall pines that stretched up to meet the sky. For the first few months, I threw myself into renovating the place, pouring money and time into restoring it to its former glory. There was something almost sacred about bringing the old property back to life, like I was fulfilling some unspoken promise to Grandpa. I found his old journals, too, tucked away in the back of a dusty closet, entries about the history of the land, the people who'd worked it, and his endless plans for its future. His voice was there in every word, and reading them made me feel closer to them, like he was standing, guiding me somehow. It was comforting, grounding. I started to believe I was doing exactly what he would have wanted, living the life he'd envisioned for me. I got a dog, Molly, a scrappy little mutt with mismatched eyes and a tail that never seemed to stop wagging. She was a stray I found wandering the property one morning, and something about her felt right, like she belonged here, just like I did. We took to exploring the woods together, trekking through trails that snaked between the trees, discovering old hunting blinds and forgotten paths that seemed to lead nowhere. I'd end up each day with her curled up at my feet, exhausted but happy, the firelight dancing across the walls of the old living room. I even started reconnecting with the family. After everything that happened, after the bloodshed and betrayal of that night, I thought it would be impossible. But somehow it wasn't. Uncle Jacob dropped by one weekend with a bottle of whiskey, offering me a gruff apology for the way things went down. He and Dad took to visiting more often after that, fixing the barn or clearing the brush around the lake. There was laughter again, stories shared over campfires, even talk of starting up a new family hunt, something tamer, just deer or turkey, nothing like before. It was like the land was healing itself, and we were healing. For a while, I let myself believe that the worst was over, that I had survived the horror of that night and came out the other side stronger, whole. I started to think that maybe I really was the man Grandpop had always believed I could be, the one worthy of the mantle he forced on me. I'd rebuilt. I'd endured. I'd won. But then things began to change. It started, slowly, creeping in at the edges of my new perfect life like rot spreading beneath a fresh coat of paint. One morning, I woke up to find the barn door hanging open. The heavy lock twisted and mangled as if something massive had forced its way inside. Molly was trembling, her ears flat against her skull, staring out at the tree line as if she was seeing something that shouldn't be there. I wrote it off as some wandering bear, cursing myself for leaving food scraps out. And then there were the dreams. They came without warning. Dark, twisted things filled with snarling shadows and flashes of teeth. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, the taste of blood sharp in my mouth. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror and swear that my eyes looked different, brighter, wilder. But when I'd blink, it was gone, replaced by the same familiar reflection. I brushed it off, told myself that it was just stress, the strain of running the estate, of holding everything together. But then I started waking up elsewhere. The first time it happened in late spring. I opened my eyes to find myself sprawled in the middle of a clearing deep in the woods, mud caked to my clothes, the scent of pine and decay thick in my nostrils. Molly was nowhere to be seen. My head spun as I staggered to my feet, trying to remember how I'd gotten there. The last thing I recalled was falling asleep in the couch, the fire burning low in the hearth. I chalked it up to sleepwalking, an old childhood habit, come back to haunt me. But the second time, I woke up by the lake, the water lapping at my bare feet. There was blood in my hands, dried and crusted under my nails, and no matter how hard I scrubbed, the stains wouldn't come out. Molly was barking wildly from somewhere far off, and when I finally found her, she recoiled, tail tucked between her legs, a low growl rumbling in her throat. After that, the changes started coming faster, harder to ignore. The land, my land, felt different somehow, like it was watching me, waiting. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, a flash of fur, a dark shape slipping between the trees, but when I'd turn, there'd be nothing there. Then there was the hunger. It crept up on me slowly, a gnawing emptiness that twisted my stomach, clawed at my insides. No matter how much I ate, it was never enough. The meat in my freezer started disappearing faster than I could restock it, and raw steaks became my go-to midnight snack. I tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself it was just a phase, just stress, just grief. But deep down, I knew the hunger wasn't normal. It wasn't human. It all came to a head last week. I woke up in the middle of the woods again, my body aching, my skin stretched tight over new corded muscle. My senses were sharper, clearer. the scent of damp earth and animal musk filling my nose, the sound of water trickling somewhere nearby like a living pulse. And there, not 10 feet away, lay a deer, or what was left of one. His body was torn open, the flesh shredded, the bones cracked and splintered. Blood soaked the ground, still warm, and the smell of it. God, the smell made my mouth water. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat, but I caught sight of my hands. They were coated in gore, thick and sticky. My nails longer, sharper, almost clawed. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I wasn't just waking up in strange places. I was hunting, killing, and I had no memory of it, no control. I tried to deny it, tried to rationalize. But last night I found myself standing in the kitchen, staring at a silver knife on the counter. I picked it up without thinking. The pain was immediate, searing, like touching a live wire. The metal hissed against my skin, blistering the flesh on contact, the burn spreading up my arm like wildfire. I dropped the knife, gasping, and stared at my hand in horror. The skin was raw, angry red already bubbling. The scent of burned meat filled the room. And that was when I knew. And now, as the full moon rises, I can feel it deep in my bones, in the marrow of my very being. The change is coming. I was becoming what he was. A monster in my own land. A beast. The next hunt is mine. And God help anyone who steps foot in these woods, because I don't know if I'll be able to stop. I looked in the mirror yesterday and saw the first patch of coarse fur sprouting along my jawline. My eyes are changing, too. Yellow, like his. And some nights, when the moon's full, I hear that roar again, rumbling up from deep in my chest. Last night I tried holding a silver chain. The skin bubbled and seared, leaving angry red welts that still haven't healed. I didn't just inherit Grandpa's estate. I inherited everything he left behind, including his curse. And now, as I feel the pull of the moonrise, I know the hunt isn't over. It's just beginning. I hope you enjoyed Hallows Eve Hunt by N.M. Brown as performed by yours truly. If you enjoyed that tale and would love to read more from tonight's very talented featured author, you can help support him by visiting simplyscarypodcast.com/nm-brown. That's simplyscarypodcast.com/nm-brown. Thanks again for your support of this program and tonight's featured author.
I think this is where I am supposed to say something about being in a very hairy situation, but that would just be uncaring. That poor young man, inheriting everything, and then the boundaries in his life start getting very fuzzy. Oh dear, did I just say that?
But we do have a fine tale of post-trick-or-treating about to go wrong. It seems it's not a good idea to be out after the kiddies have all finished their rounds, because that's when other things come out to play. Here is a nice chilly tale to keep you company from ctfdn founder Craig Groshek. Without further ado, I present to you The Erasure. Part 1. The final echoes of children's laughter faded down the street, blending with the rustling of dry autumn leaves as Simon stood on his porch, surveying the quiet neighborhood. The air was crisp. The scent of dying leaves and faint smoke from distant bonfires carried on the breeze. A soft smile tugged at his lips as he glanced down at the nearly empty candy bowl. Just a few stray pieces of cheap chocolate and lollipops remained, a testament to a successful night of trick-or-treating. "Guess we did well this year, huh, Jasper?" he murmured, glancing down at his small dog. Jasper, a wiry little terrier mix with a perpetually scruffy coat, wagged his tail enthusiastically, clearly pleased by his master's attention. Simon bent down and scratched behind the dog's ears, then set the candy bowl inside the house and shut the door behind him. The porch lights of nearby houses were beginning to flicker out one by one, signaling the end of Halloween festivities. The streets, which had been bustling with children in costumes just an hour earlier, were now quieting down. A few straggling families hurried past, herding kids dressed as superheroes and princesses toward parked cars. Jack-o'-lanterns still grinned eerily from porches and lawns, their flickering flames casting dancing shadows across the sidewalks. Simon took a deep breath, savoring the last few moments of the evening. "All right, let's go for a quick walk before bed, boy," he said, clipping the leash to Jasper's harness. The dog immediately perked up, his ears twitching as he sniffed the brisk night air. They set off down the block, passing houses adorned with cobweb-covered skeletons, inflatable ghosts, and one particularly elaborate display featuring a full graveyard setup. Gravestones poked out of the overgrown grass, with plastic hands crawling up from the earth. Fog from a hidden smoke machine curled around the feet of the skeletal reaper, its glowing red eyes staring menacingly at anyone who dared walk past. Simon chuckled softly. "Every year, the Johnsons go all out," he muttered, glancing down at Jasper, who was more interested in sniffing the base of the plastic tombstone than the spectacle itself. A thought struck him, and he reached for his phone, thinking to snap a quick photo of the setup for later. His fingers closed on an empty pocket. He blinked, patting his other pocket, then sighed. He'd left his phone at home, probably sitting on the kitchen counter, where he'd set it while preparing the candy bowl. "Oh, great," he murmured. For a moment, he considered turning back. He never went anywhere without his phone, after all. But it was late, and the idea of doubling back for a device he didn't really need seemed silly. They were just going for a short walk. "Come on," he muttered, shaking his head. Jasper gave a little yip, oblivious, and Simon sighed. "Guess we'll have to do without tonight." The neighborhood was alive with the remnants of Halloween. A few stray candy wrappers skittered across the pavement, caught in the wind, and porch decorations swayed lazily in the breeze. But as they moved further away from the main residential streets, the festive atmosphere began to fade. The sidewalks grew darker, the glow of jack-o'-lanterns and porch lights left behind. They reached the corner of Maple and Fifth, where the path split. To the left lay the familiar, well-lit route back to their home. To the right, shrouded in shadow, was the entrance to the local park. Simon paused, glancing at the darkened trail leading into the park's depths. The park was an unsettling place at night. Tall oaks lined the narrow path, their branches weaving together overhead to create a dense canopy. The city had never bothered installing lights along the park's inner trails, making it a relatively foreboding place once the sun set. In daylight, it was a quiet, peaceful retreat, but at night it transformed. Its secluded paths and dense foliage became an eerie maze of shadows. Jasper looked up at him expectantly, ears perked. The dog gave a small, hopeful bark, as if to say, "Let's go." "Really, bud? You want to go through there?" Simon hesitated, peering into the park's entrance. A shiver ran down his spine, but he quickly shook it off. It was Halloween night. The atmosphere of the season, combined with the lingering silence of empty streets, was probably making him feel jumpier than usual. "All right, fine. A quick loop through the park and then we're heading back," he decided, tugging Jasper's leash gently and stepping onto the gravel path. They moved forward, the sound of his shoes crunching on the gravel breaking the silence. Jasper trotted eagerly beside him, his tail wagging. Simon tried to relax, telling himself there was nothing to worry about. It was just a park, after all. He'd been through it dozens of times during the day. Jasper, he was with him, and the dog's instincts were supposed to be sharper than a human's. If there was anything dangerous out there, the terrier would surely alert him. As they ventured deeper into the park, Simon noticed how still everything was. The usual noises, rustling leaves, distant car horns, seemed to fade away. Even the breeze, which had been stirring just moments before, seemed to die down. Jasper seemed to be enjoying himself, nose twitching as he sniffed along the edges of the path. But then, about 100 yards in, he suddenly stopped. His entire body went rigid, ears flattening back against his head. Simon halted, frowning. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, glancing around. The shadows beyond the path were impenetrable, the trees forming a wall of black that swallowed their surroundings. Simon strained his ears, listening for anything unusual, but all he heard was the distant rustling of leaves in the breeze. Then came a soft, almost imperceptible noise, a faint rustling, just off the trail to their right. Simon's eyes narrowed as he peered into the darkness, trying to make out the source. He expected Jasper to bark or growl, but instead, the dog took a step back, his tail tucked tightly between his legs. "Hey, it's all right," Simon said, his voice low and soothing. He knelt beside Jasper, stroking the dog's back. Jasper whimpered softly, his gaze fixed on the inky shadows beyond the path. "Probably just a rabbit or something," Simon muttered, but his own words didn't comfort him. Jasper was normally fearless when it came to small animals. Something about the way the dog's body trembled unnerved him. "Come on, let's keep moving." He stood up and tugged gently on Jasper's leash, urging him forward. The dog resisted for a moment, then reluctantly followed, his movement stiff and uneasy. Simon quickened his pace, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread, fighting the instinct to turn and run in the opposite direction. As they continued along the trail, the rustling sound seemed to follow them, just beyond the reach of the path. Simon glanced over his shoulder, but as before, there was nothing there. After what felt like an eternity, the trees finally began to thin, revealing the outline of the park's parking lot ahead. Simon breathed a quiet sigh of relief as they stepped out of the abject darkness and onto the cracked asphalt. Only one car sat in the lot, a small black sedan parked just a few feet away. Its engine was still running, a low rumble filling the air. The dome light was on, but the headlights were off. Simon hesitated, then chuckled softly. Probably just a couple of teenagers fooling around, he murmured. Jasper didn't respond, staring warily at the car. Drawing closer, Simon peered curiously through the slightly fogged windows. He expected to see two embarrassed teens spring apart, but the vehicle was completely empty. He blinked in surprise, then glanced around the lot. There was no one in sight. "Weird," he muttered. The car's interior lights cast a soft glow, revealing a crumpled piece of clothing lying on the passenger seat. A bright orange leotard with black stripes. Simon squinted, then let out a short laugh. Looks like someone's having a good time, he said with a grin, imagining the girl who must have shed her tiger costume for other activities. He shook his head, a smile tugging at his lips. Must have been some party. His amusement was cut short by a sudden, sharp noise from across the parking lot. A shrill, eerie shriek that made the hair on his arms stand up. The sound was high-pitched and wavering, like a child's scream distorted through a broken speaker. Simon whipped around, eyes wide. There was nothing there, just the darkened lot and the thick wall of trees beyond. When he turned back to the car, the smile died on his lips. The costume, the orange leotard, was gone. The seat was empty, as if it had never been there at all. What the? Jasper growled softly, then tugged at his leash, his body straining toward the far end of the lot, where the shriek had come from. Simon swallowed hard, glancing back and forth between the empty seats and the dark woods beyond the lot. Okay, let's... Wait, no, maybe we shouldn't. But Jasper was insistent, pulling sharply at his leash, ears perked, and eyes fixed on the darkness beyond. Simon felt a reluctant, creeping curiosity bubbling up inside him. Okay, let's check it out, I guess, he whispered. But then we're out of here. Heart pounding, he took a deep breath and began moving hesitantly across the lot, following Jasper's determined tug toward the source of the sound. Part 2. No sooner had Simon matched Jasper's pace than another shriek reverberated through the still air, freezing them both in place. It was piercing and warbling, unnatural. He glanced down at Jasper, expecting the dog to react timidly like before, but this time was different. Jasper's entire posture shifted. His ears snapped forward, his muscles tensed, and a low, rumbling growl escaped his throat. Jasper, wait. But before Simon could finish, Jasper bolted, his small frame lunging forward with a burst of energy. The leash slipped through Simon's fingers in an instant, and the dog shot across the parking lot, barking furiously at the darkness beyond. Jasper, no, stop! Simon yelled, his voice breaking with panic. Without thinking, he took off after the dog, his sneakers slapping against the cracked asphalt. The night closed in around him as he ran, the world shrinking to just the sound of his own rapid breaths and Jasper's barks, which were quickly being swallowed by the eerie shrieking echoing from the trees. Jasper, he shouted again, his heart pounding. His legs pumped furiously, his eyes straining to follow the little dog's blurred shape. He felt completely exposed out here, like a solitary figure under a spotlight, every instinct in his body screaming at him to turn back, to get away from whatever was making that awful noise. But Jasper didn't stop. The terrier charged headlong toward the far end of the lot, where another vehicle, a dark SUV, was parked just beyond the tree line. Simon's pulse spiked. Had that been there before? Jasper's barks grew frantic as he reached the vehicle. The dog circled it once, yapping and snarling at the woods behind it. Simon skidded to a halt, panting, just a few feet away. The shrieking was deafening now, a harsh, grating sound that seemed to come from all around them. Simon's eyes darted to the SUV, its dark windows reflecting his own silhouette in ghostly smears. The vehicle, like the car on the opposite side of the lot, was empty. Its doors were flung wide open, its interior lights blazing. No, Simon muttered, glancing around wildly. What was going on? His gaze flickered to the woods, but he couldn't see a thing but more shadows. "Jasper!" he shouted again, his voice hoarse. The little dog ignored him, continuing to bark furiously at the trees. Then, abruptly, he stopped. Simon's stomach clenched as Jasper's barking cut off mid-yelp, replaced by a series of frantic, high-pitched whines. The dog backed away from the tree line, his body low and trembling, ears flattened against his skull. "Jasper, come here," Simon called, edging closer. The dog turned and darted toward the underbrush, slipping between the thick branches and vanishing from sight. Simon's breath caught in his throat. "Jasper!" He hesitated, his body screaming at him to turn and run, but he couldn't just leave his dog out there. The shrieking was almost unbearable now, louder and more piercing, reverberating through his skull. He felt a sudden urge to clap his hand over his ears, to block out the sound, but he forced himself to focus. "Damn it," he hissed, his voice trembling. He took a deep breath, then plunged into the woods after Jasper. The world seemed to shift as he stepped off the asphalt and into the tangled undergrowth. Branches snagged at his clothes, scratching his face and arms as he pushed forward. The trees closed in around him, and their gnarled limbs forming a dark web overhead. Every step felt wrong, his footfalls muffled by the thick carpet of dead leaves and twisted roots. "Jasper!" he called, stumbling forward. The sound of the dog's whines was somewhere up ahead, but the shrieks were growing louder, overlapping with each other until they became a chaotic din of cries, whispers, and giggles. Simon froze, his pulse hammering in his ears. The shrieking wasn't just one voice, it was many. Dozens, maybe even hundreds. And they weren't just shrieking anymore. The sounds twisted and warped, becoming a jumbled mess of choked sobs, snatches of broken laughter, and sharp, whispering voices. His skin crawled. He couldn't understand the words. They were too fast, too garbled. But the tone was clear, mocking, hungry, like a crowd of unseen things watching him, amused by his panic. "Jasper!" He breathed, his voice small and desperate. "Please, boy, come back." He pushed forward, his vision narrowing as he tried to follow the sound of his dog. He stumbled, nearly falling, then froze. There, just a few feet ahead, was Jasper's harness. It lay in a twisted heap on the ground, the leash trailing off into the darkness. Simon's heart plummeted. "Jasper!" he whispered, his voice shaking. The dog's whines were gone. The woods had fallen silent, the shrieking voices abruptly cutting off. Simon stood frozen, staring down at the discarded harness. Where was Jasper? Why had the leash... A rustling sound, soft but distinct, came from the underbrush to his left. Simon's breath caught in his throat, his gaze snapping toward the sound. "Jasper," he whispered again. The bushes trembled, and then Jasper burst out, his little body streaked with dirt and leaves, his eyes wide and frantic. The dog didn't stop, didn't even look at him, just bolted past, tail tucked between his legs, heading back toward the parking lot. "Jasper, wait!" Simon spun, reaching out as if to grab him, but the dog was already gone, a blur of fur vanishing into the night. A sharp crack behind him made him whirl around. Something moved in the shadows, something big, shifting between the trees just out of sight. Simon's mouth went dry. He took a step back, heart hammering. Whatever was out there, it was close. He could feel it. Another crack, louder this time, and Simon's body jerked in fear. He stumbled back, his eyes darting wildly around the darkened forest. The shrieking started up again, a low, rumbling chorus of voices rising from the depths of the woods. And then he heard it. Something else. A sound that cut through the shrieks like a blade. A deep, rasping breath, almost imperceptible but unmistakable. It came from somewhere just behind him, so close he could feel the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. Simon turned and ran. He tore through the underbrush, branches clawing at his clothes and skin. His lungs burned, his legs screaming with pain, but he didn't dare slow down. The breath had followed him, a faint, hot exhalation brushing against the back of his neck. No matter how fast he ran, the thing kept pace, slipping between the trees just out of sight. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The thought of seeing whatever was behind him sent a spike of pure terror through his chest. He broke through the tree line, stumbling out onto the gravel path. The parking lot loomed ahead, the dark shapes of the two abandoned cars blurred by his panicked vision. Jasper was there, standing at the edge of the lot, his body trembling. Come on, Simon gasped, forcing his legs to keep moving. He reached the dog, grabbed his harness, and hauled him forward. Jasper yelped but didn't resist, his eyes fixed on the woods behind them. The shrieking voices swelled, rising to a fever pitch. Simon didn't look back. He couldn't. He just ran, dragging Jasper with him as they sprinted toward the safety of the streetlights at the far edge of the park. The breath was behind him now, hot and dry against his neck. He could feel it touching his skin, like the caress of invisible fingers. His vision blurred, his lungs screaming for air. And then they were out, bursting into the harsh glow of the streetlights, the darkness falling away behind them. Simon collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. The shrieking cut off abruptly, leaving only the quiet hum of the streetlights and the distant sound of cars in the night. He glanced back, trembling. The parking lot was empty. The woods were still. Whatever had been chasing them was gone. But Simon's heart still raced, his body trembling with fear. He touched the back of his neck where the breath had brushed against his skin and felt a strange prickling sensation. Something was wrong. Come on, boy, he whispered, his voice shaking. Let's get out of here. He staggered to his feet, pulling Jasper along, and hurried down the street in the direction of his home. Part 3. Simon burst through the front door of his house, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it would tear through his chest. He barely managed to shove the door shut behind him, the lock clicking with a reassuring thud. The house was quiet and dim, the only light spilling in from the street lamp outside. Jasper squirmed at his side, still shaking violently, his small body trembling with fear. It's okay, boy. We're safe, Simon whispered, collapsing onto the floor in a heap, his back pressed against the door. He gripped Jasper's leash tightly, trying to calm both of them, the adrenaline still surging through his veins. His entire body felt numb and weak, and his mind struggled to catch up with what had just happened. What was that? Simon murmured to himself, his voice thin and strained. He didn't have an answer. All he knew was that they had barely escaped. Whatever it was that had chased them out of the woods. Something unseen, something that breathed on him. He shuddered involuntarily, his hand reaching up to rub the back of his neck, where the sensation had lingered. Then he froze. The skin there felt strange, wrong. It was smooth to the touch, unnaturally so, almost as if it had been polished. There was no trace of the faint stubble he should have felt, no warmth or texture. It was like touching a piece of plastic or wax. What? Simon muttered, his hand trembling as he traced the spot again. His fingertips tingled and he pulled his hand back, staring in confusion at his fingers. A fine grayish dust coated the pads of his fingers, as if he'd been handling something brittle and dry. He blinked, confused, and then a cold wave of terror swept through him. The dust was coming from him. Simon scrambled to his feet, his eyes wide with disbelief. He held his fingers up, staring as the gray powder continued to flake off. The skin there was dissolving, crumbling away without a trace of pain. His pulse hammered in his ears as he watched, frozen in shock, as the pads of his fingers began to crumble into fine ash, the edges breaking apart and disintegrating into the air. "No," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "No, no, no." He stumbled into the bathroom, still gripping Jasper's leash tightly in his good hand. He threw the door open, flicking on the light, and thrust his hand under the faucet. The water splashed over his dissolving fingers, and for a brief, frantic moment, he thought it might help. But the opposite happened. The water seemed to accelerate the process. "Stop! Please, stop!" Simon pleaded, yanking his hand back. But it was too late. His fingertips continued to break apart, the skin and bones silently crumbling away. He watched, paralyzed, as his fingers disappeared, reduced to stubs in a matter of seconds. His breath hitched, and he felt his knees go weak. "What's happening?" he whimpered, staring in horror at his disintegrating hand. The dissolution spread slowly but inexorably, moving up his hand, then his wrist. His skin bubbled and effervesced, tiny granules breaking free and drifting away in a fine mist. He tried to flex his hand, but there was nothing left to move. His fingers, his whole hand, was simply vanishing. "Jasper," he croaked, turning desperately toward the little dog. Jasper stood in the doorway, watching him with wide, terrified eyes. Simon reached out with his remaining hand, but stopped short, afraid to touch him. What if whatever was happening to him spread to Jasper, too? "Stay back, boy," he whispered, voice trembling. Stay back." Tears filled his eyes as he stumbled backward, his arm dissolving, hanging uselessly at his side. He needed to call someone. He needed help. His mind raced, and he spun around, searching for his phone. It wasn't in his pockets. Panic surged through him. He'd left it at home, forgotten, on the kitchen counter, before the walk. "Damn it!" he screamed, his voice cracking. He staggered into the living room, eyes darting around frantically. He spotted the phone on the counter and lunged for it with his good hand, clutching it desperately as the other continued to flake away. Trembling, he tapped at the screen, his hands slick with sweat. He managed to swipe to the dialer and jabbed in the numbers, 911, just as his crumbling hand dropped to his side, unable to hold the phone anymore. "Please, please, pick up," he whimpered, staring as his dissolving fingers began to vanish entirely, reduced to wisps of gray powder drifting into the air. The line connected with a soft click. 911, what's your emergency?" A woman's calm voice answered. Simon's mouth opened, but no words came out. His arm was disintegrating up to the elbow now, and a raw, primal terror choked his throat. A sound escaped him, a broken, strangled scream that seemed to echo through the empty house. "Sir, are you there? What's the nature of your emergency?" the dispatcher asked, her tone sharpening with concern. But all Simon could do was scream. The sound tore through him, desperate and filled with agony. He was being erased piece by piece, his body turning to dust in the silent air. Jasper whined beside him, his little paws scrabbling against the floor as if he wanted to help but didn't know how. "Help me!" Simon screamed, the words garbled and thin as his throat tightened. "Please help me!" The dispatcher's breath hitched audibly. "Sir, stay calm. I'm sending help. Please, stay on the line. Help is on the way." But Simon didn't hear her. His hand was gone, his forearm crumbling rapidly. He dropped to his knees, gasping for breath. The phone fell to the floor, landing with a dull thud. He could hear the dispatcher's voice calling out frantically, but it was fading, distant and hollow. "Please, just hold on. Help is coming." But it was too late. The dissolution spread faster now, consuming his torso and then his legs. His body felt weightless, insubstantial, as if he were dissolving into the very air around him. The last thing he managed was a single broken scream, a sound of pure, unfiltered terror. And then he collapsed, his form breaking apart like a sandcastle, washed away by the tide. The dispatcher's voice crackled over the 911 line, growing increasingly urgent as she tried to get Simon to respond. "Sir, are you there? Please answer, sir." There was no reply, only the faint sound of Jasper's distressed whimpers in the background. The first responders arrived at the scene moments later. Finding the front door locked, they wasted no time. With a powerful heave, they forced the door open, bursting inside. Flashlights sliced through the dim interior as they scanned the house, shouting Simon's name. "Hello, sir! Where are you?" one of them called out as they entered. They quickly noticed the little dog, frantic and barking, darting around the living room. Jasper led them toward the center of the room, where a foot, still clad in a sneaker, lay on the floor. The foot was dissolving, the skin and fabric flaking away into fine dust. "What the hell?" The paramedic breathed. He dropped to his knees beside it, reaching out gingerly. His fingers brushed against the shoe's surface, and it crumbled instantly, the rubber and fabric disintegrating into fine gray powder. He jerked his hand back, staring at the empty patch of floor where the shoe and the foot had been. "What happened here?" another responder whispered, his voice filled with bewilderment. As they stood in stunned silence, Jasper whined, darting back to the door, then back to the floor where Simon had been, barking desperately. The only sound was the dispatcher's distant voice coming from the dropped phone, still connected and echoing hollowly across the silent room. "Sir, are you there? Please respond." The first responders stood in the fading light, their faces etched with confusion and concern as they attempted to coax Jasper into their vehicle. The little dog whimpered softly, his small body trembling, eyes darting between the responders and the house that had once been his home. They exchanged glances, trying to process the inexplicable scene before them. As they prepared to take him to a nearby animal shelter, one of the responders gently secured Jasper's leash. The dog seemed to sense the finality of the moment. He cast one last longing glance back at the house, a flicker of recognition passing through his eyes. With a soft whimper, Jasper turned his head away. The responders glanced at one another, as if searching for answers, but there were none to be found, only the aftermath of a tragedy they couldn't fully grasp. Back in the park, in the dim light of the forest, a cold, lifeless arm, the woman's body it had once been attached to, long since disintegrated, lay partially buried among the underbrush, its fingers splayed and outstretched, as if reaching for something just beyond its grasp. Silently, gradually, the skin crumbled away, beginning at the base of the forearm and slowly spreading to the fingers, the last evidence that anyone had ever set foot in the woods that night faded away, dissolving into dust carried away indifferently by the night breeze. Deeper in the woods, something unseen shifted. It traveled with an unsettling grace, slipping between the trees like a shadow, before vanishing entirely, leaving no trace of its presence behind. I hope you enjoyed the Erasure by Craig Groshek as performed by yours truly. If you enjoyed that tale and would love to read more from tonight's very talented featured author, you can help support him by visiting simplyscarypodcast.com/Craig-Groshek. That's simplyscarypodcast.com/CRAIG-GROSHEK. Thanks again for your support of this program and tonight's featured author.
Why, that fellow disappeared faster than York peppermint patties in my freezer on November 2nd.
But at least Jasper will likely find a new home. Always a happy ending when the animal gets to eat Alpo another day.
Well then, if you're ready, I have my story to tell you. Ever conducted a séance? Lovely thing when it works out. Spirits moving the little Ouija board pointer. Voices calling out from the possessed. The moment when the person in the next room trying to fake everything realizes he is not in charge anymore. Such fun. Well, here is a story from Kyle Harrison in which we get a front row seat to the world's craziest séance, where truths will be revealed. Settle down and settle in as I tell you the tale of the 19-minute séance. Boys and girls of every age, wouldn't you like to see something strange? It was Halloween night. I could hear the opening lyrics to that Burton classic as soon as I stepped onto Ryan Aldrich's front porch. I had just been dropped off by my parents at the front gate of his community and was sure I was underdressed as a ninja. A nearby mummy decoration popped up from his candy display and cackled, giving me a healthy jump scare when I rang the doorbell. It was going to be a good night. He opened the door with a comb in his hair, half of it streaked white with dye, fake fangs in his mouth, and a bit of goop dripping from his lips. "Dex, you're early. I was just getting ready," he said, waving me in. The decorations were a bit more toned down inside. Little jack-o'-lantern lights strung up in odd places, a few skull candles. The TV was blaring some old classic monster movie, and he reached for the remote before tossing it to me. "Make yourself comfortable. I gotta get this stupid dye to cooperate." "Thanks. I hope it's not too early. We were supposed to pick up Jessie, but our plans got cancelled," I told him as he went back to his small hallway bathroom. "Ah, that sucks. She won't make it, huh?" he shouted as I switched his TV over to Hulu. I looked at pictures of his family nearby, thinking it had been too long since I had seen them. "Yeah, had to take her little—" I paused as I realized my choice of words and pretended to forget what I was saying. "So, who else is supposed to show up?" I asked him as I opened the door and screamed, and, this time, actually jumped when a prop skeleton fell out. I heard his laughter from the other room when I screamed, and he stuck his head out the hallway to see my face. "That's what you deserve," he told me with another belly laugh. "Damn, man," I muttered, reaching around the prop to grab one of his dad's beers. "Are there any other traps I need to be aware of? Am I going to get a mousetrap on my hand if I reach into the cookie jar?" Considering the bad blood that had been between us, I wasn't going to put anything past him. The doorbell rang just as I cracked open the Coors Light, and Rylan responded. "Now where's the fun in telling you that? Hey, can you grab the door?" I sipped the cold beer as I opened it, trying my best to remain cool, when I saw his girlfriend, Daisy Simmons, standing there looking sexy as hell in a devil costume, holding a few snacks. "Daisy, hey, Ryland's in the back." "Well, are you going to let me in?" she said irritably. I nodded and put my beer down to help her with the food as I pushed the door ajar. "Ryland, you gave me the wrong damn key code for your neighborhood," she whined, tugging him out of the bathroom. "Jesus, babe, I didn't know they would change the gate code tonight," he apologized as she pushed his fake fangs in his mouth, and then the two briefly kissed. It wasn't a short peck, but it wasn't too long to make me uncomfortable. "It's fine. Once I got it open, I wrote the damn thing on the device for anybody else," she said. Ryland gave her a look of disbelief. Babe, that's only supposed to be for residents," he told her. She shrugged and grabbed the beer I had set down to take a sip. "It'll be fine. Hey, Dex, can you go help Val get the stuff out of my trunk?" I nodded and put the bagged chips down on his counter to go help her sister. Ryland's gated community was starting to get a trickle of cars in, thanks to Daisy's unintentional assistance. Even as I walked toward her Equinox, a sports car was squeezing in the cul-de-sac for parking. It looked overly familiar. "Hey, I'm trying to get my trunk open," I heard Val say as the new car bumped a little too close for comfort and dropped off her witch hat. She used her sister's keys to click open the hatch and gave me an awkward smile. "Sorry you had to see that, Dex. Guess this costume kinda fits me, huh?" I chuckled as I helped her grab stuff from the trunk. "Maybe if people learn manners, you wouldn't need to worry about the costume," I commented loud enough for the driver of the other vehicle to hear. I was also trying to get a good look at the driver, but couldn't see for sure who it was. Must be my imagination, I thought. I picked up the food that was heaviest and told her to stack as much as she could in my arms, my eyes lingering on something at the bottom of her items. "A Ouija board? Really?" I said skeptically as Val put the board game at the top of my stack. "Specially requested by our host. Took me forever to find the thing. I haven't played with one in years," she said. I followed her back inside the house where I saw that a few other people had somehow made it inside while we were unloading. The TV was now up, cranked to 11 with some pop music, and Ryland helped me start distributing things on the kitchen counter. "I thought you said this was only going to be a few people," I told him, not even recognizing the newcomers. He gave me a look and then eyed Daisy, who was already chatting it up with one of the girls. "Apparently a private party means post the address on Facebook," he commented. The doorbell rang again and Val opened it to let in about 6 more people, all of whom were about as loud and as obnoxious as the others. "You're the one who said your parents won't be home until Friday," Daisy commented with a laugh. "Come on, Ryland, lighten up. None of us are going to trash the place." The minute I heard the voice, I tried not to panic. I knew I had recognized that fancy car. "Nick? You invited Nick?" "It's like you said before, Dex. Let the good times roll," Ryland said with a laugh as he waved to the football jock. "You guys can do whatever you want. The real party will be upstairs anyway," he said. "What does that mean?" Nick asked as he glanced over at the Ouija board and shook the box. "You guys gonna wet your pants while chatting with ghosts?" He laughed. "We're going to try the 19-minute seance," Ryland said, without even breaking his gaze. I found myself suddenly a bit uneasy as a few others in the room paused what they were doing when he said it. It couldn't be the real story, I thought. Nick gave them all funny looks and then stared back at Ryland. "And what's up? Some kind of TikTok challenge?" Ryland finished stocking up the fridge and then grabbed the Ouija board from the jock. "It's for big boys and girls you wouldn't understand," he responded as he passed it to Val. Nick laughed as the doorbell rang and I saw a couple more familiar faces coming in the door. The party slowly going back to normal as everyone tried to ignore what Ryland had claimed. As Nick got distracted, I pulled Ryland aside to his dad's office and closed the door. "Hey, you weren't serious about that, were you?" My friend gave me an impish grin. "What do you think?" We were staring at each other for a bit too long. and I finally did my best to give a nervous chuckle. I'm not stupid, Dex. I know my brother ain't coming back. Besides, everyone knows you have to bring 3 boards to do it anyway. He shrugged me off. That was just to get Nick to shut up and to discourage him from coming upstairs while we have some real fun, he said as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a bag of weed. My eyes widened in surprise. Where did you get that? Todd, he's going to bring some more too, once he can sneak out and make it here, Ryland told me. I couldn't help but nervously laugh again. I didn't want to admit that I wasn't one of the cool kids and had never tried the devil's lettuce. Nor did I like the fact that his dead brother was now a topic of conversation. Take this upstairs to Daisy, and I'll keep these lunkheads down here distracted for a little bit, he told me, passing the bag to my open hand. When we stepped back to the living room, I couldn't help but feel a little anxious because of how many people were here. I wish that my partner Jessie had been able to come, I thought as I shot her a text while I walked up the stairs. Daisy was in Ryland's room, grunting as she pushed his bed out of the way to give us all the chance to sit on the bare floor. He needs a table and chairs up here. My ass is going to be chafed, I commented as she told me to help. I shoved the weed in my pocket and we pushed the bed the rest of the way and then collapsed on the floor. It was then I noticed that there was another, older Ouija board under his bed already. Why would he have 2? Was he lying earlier? What's with you? You look like you're seeing a ghost, Daisy commented. I decided to see if maybe she was in on the scheme. Do you know about the 19-minute séance, I asked. She gave me a snobbish look. Oh, please. Ryland talked about that all week. Obsessed. Don't tell me you're a conspiracy nerd too, she said with a laugh. I think he wants us to attempt it. Here, see? There's already another Ouija board. All we need is 3 and we can perform the ritual. Do you know what it does? I asked, my hand shaking as I took it out from under his bed. You're serious? You really think if we try some creepypasta challenge, we'll get haunted by demons? She laughed. I would rather not take my chances, especially not on Halloween, I told her. Daisy laughed and ignored me. This sounds like we'll have fun scaring you. I decided to storm back downstairs and confront Ryland. If he wasn't going to be straight with me, I was leaving. My phone pinged as I got halfway down the stairs and stopped to read a text from Jessie. Before I could put the phone back in my pocket, Todd drunkenly stumbled past me with something in his hands and had dropped it all the way to the floor below. I watched in horror as my phone smashed up on Ryland's tile floor. What the hell? Watch where you're going, I said to Todd as I focused on what he had brought, the 3rd Ouija board, confirming that Ryland wasn't just blowing smoke to Nick earlier. My heart sank as Todd shimmied past me. Relax, bro. I'm sure your rich daddy can buy you another phone. Ignoring his snide comments, I rushed to the floor below and picked up my broken phone, trying to see if it would work. I needed someone to come pick me up and take me away from here fast before something terrible happened. But all I saw was a glitchy and cracked screen. What the heck happened? Ryland asked as he squeezed past 2 partying girls in the hallway. I should ask you that. What the hell are you planning upstairs? The truth this time, I shouted. Dex, what are you talking about? The truth? Really? He asked. But I didn't have time for games. I grabbed my stuff and said, I don't want a part of this. I'm heading home. Ryland tried to grab my wrist. You don't get to walk away from me, he shouted, but I shoved him back, hard enough to knock over a few snacks. Nick and a few others saw the commotion and started to trickle into the vestibule of the kitchen. What have we got here? A lover's spat? He joked. Ryland stood up and looked at the mess and then at me. He had anger in his eyes. Nick, I was just kidding about earlier. Could you help Dex upstairs? I want you in on our little project, he told the jock. I did my best not to snap. Nick seemed a bit confused, thankfully. You mean like, force them to go? Yes, musclehead. Use those abs for something useful. Dex here wants to leave and tattle on our fun, Rylan lied. I saw something different in my friend. I recognized it was malice, and I realized what was really happening. Nick snorted and cracked his knuckles, his buddies blocking my exit. Well, we can't have that now, can we? He moved to grab my arm and shoved me up the stairs, and I reached for a wine bottle, smashing it on the jock's head. As the glass shattered over his thick skull, I turned to run to the bathroom. I knew there was a window I could crawl out of. A few guests shrieked as I ran past and slammed the bathroom door shut, locking it and then sliding the shower door open to reach the window. It was just about 2 feet above my head. A few guests shrieked as I ran past and slammed the bathroom door shut, locking it and then sliding the shower door open to reach the window. It was just about 2 feet above my head. I heard Rylan shouting for help from the other football players to get the door open as I anxiously stood up on the edge of the bathtub to reach the window, angling it to give me enough room to slide out. I grabbed the exterior awning and started to pull my body up. The door rocked and shimmied, ready to fly off the hinges behind me. I was grunting and getting halfway up and into the crawl space when they managed to shove the door open and pile into the bathroom. My upper body was out. I was ready to get away. Then Nick grabbed my ankle and snagged me back into the bathroom. I don't think I have ever kicked someone so hard in all my life, but this time it didn't make a difference. His buddies were on either side of my arms, grabbing me and keeping me from flailing, as I saw Rylan stand in the doorway, looking like some kind of mad, overpowered leader. "Let me go!" I screamed. I was hoping someone out in the hallway would see this insanity and stop it, but everyone was looking to our host for instructions, and his orders were clear. "Upstairs, tie them to a chair and put them in my room. Tape that mouth of his too. I'm tired of what it's spewing." The jocks held firmly to my legs and arms, carrying me from the bathroom out the hallway to the stairs. I looked frantically from side to side toward the other guests, hoping anyone would see how crazy this looked. I tried to shout that the players were going to rape me, anything I could do to get free. But Rylan cranked the music up, and my pleas fell on deaf ears. As we reached the upper floor, I saw Daisy in the doorway, looking a bit perplexed by what was happening. "We got a snitch. Grab that chair," Nick ordered. Val and Todd were there too, setting up the Ouija boards. Guys, don't do this, don't. This is a bad idea, please," I said as Nick and his friend shoved me into the chair. "How are we supposed to tie him down?" one of them asked. "Tie him down? What's going on?" Todd asked. I focused on him. "They're trying to do the ritual. Todd, you saw what we read on the dark web. We can't do this. Rylan can't." Val was the one that looked the most concerned. "I thought this was harmless fun," she commented. "It is. Dex is being dramatic as usual," Rylan said as he entered the room. He was carrying a roll of duct tape. "Probably wants to slip off with our stash to Jesse's place, huh?" he said as he reached into my pocket and took out the weed. Nick suddenly laughed hysterically. "Is that what this is about? Little goody two-shoes don't want to get high?" "Pretty much," Rylan said. "No. Look, guys, I don't care what you were doing here. I won't tell a soul. But I don't want to be a part of it," I told them. Rylan gave Nick zip ties for my hands and feet. "You expect us to believe that?" Todd asked. "My phone is broken and I got dropped off. I would have to walk out of here," I told them, as they made sure the restraints were good and tight. I saw Val standing in the corner looking more and more worried. Maybe what I was saying was getting through to her. "Or go alert the neighbors who might call the cops," Nick scoffed. Somewhere downstairs we heard a loud noise, and I was the one with a nervous laugh now. "Pretty sure that's going to happen anyway thanks to Daisy's invite. This is a private neighborhood, and your house is party central. They're already on their way." This was enough of a threat to make the rest of the group nervous. Everyone looked at Rylan. "Nick, go downstairs and work crowd control. We'll get things ready in here," he said. The jock didn't have to be told twice. Once he was gone, Rylan locked the door. He had a dark look on his face, and suddenly it was crystal clear what this was about. I had doubted before, but now I knew. "This really is about Sawyer," I said, my mouth going dry. Val stood up from the corner, her eyes widening. "Sawyer? Is that true?" Ryland didn't say a thing as he pulled the duct tape out and focused on me. "How about you just take a time out while the grown-ups do some talking?" he said, placing the silver sticky material over my lips. Once it was on good, Ryland focused on Val, who seemed to be the only one in the room who was not in the know. "Yes, we're going to try and bring Sawyer back. That a problem with you?" he snapped. Val looked at her sister and then paced the room. Yeah, it's a big problem. I thought we were just going to smoke some weed and then do a stupid-ass seance to see a few hallucinations. Not real dark magic," she mumbled. "I mean, we can do that too. No one knows if this is going to work anyway," Daisy said with a laugh. The way she laughed, she seemed a little shocked that her boyfriend was so serious about it too. "It has to. We have everything we need," Ryland said. There was a knock at the door and Todd opened it to let Nick back in. "Everything's kosher downstairs, bro. We ready to get this party started?" he asked. I tried my best to get his attention, but my words were only muffled. "Man, you really do pull crazy parties. So what's the plan here?" Nick said, sitting on the bed beside Val. Ryland locked the door again and gave Todd and Daisy orders. "Let's get Dex in the center of the sigil, and, Nick, you'll be over here on this side, okay?" He tapped on a different rolling chair and pulled it to the backside of mine. "Sweet, we can cuddle," he teased as he rubbed his sweaty face against mine. I wished I could tell him what he was getting involved with, but it was too late. Once Nick sat down opposite me, Todd and Daisy put their Ouija boards on either side of us, and Ryland told Val to go to the top to form a triangle. I could tell she was hesitant. What happens if we succeed?" she asked. "That should be obvious. Sawyer," Ryland told us. "Who is Sawyer? When are we going to smoke a blunt, bro?" Nick said irritably. Todd was the one to handle that, getting some of the weed out and prepping the jock a roll of the stuff. "Enjoy," he said. Nick took a few smokes and immediately began to relax. "Ah, yeah, that's the good stuff." Ryland was still staring at Val, waiting for her to comply. I don't know about this," Val said, looking to her sister for confirmation. "Look, do you want him back or what?" Daisy snapped. "Well, sure, of course. Yeah, but he's dead. Gone. You don't come back from that," Val muttered. "You do if we succeed," Ryland told her. The room was dead silent except for Nick's occasional sharp cough. Finally, Val relented and placed her Ouija board at the top of the triangle. Ryland made sure the door was locked. "Are we ready to start?" he asked. Todd and Daisy gave a nod and took out their smartphones to set a timer. Val did the same. "Bro, what is all this anyway?" Nick asked. Ryland turned off the room lights, and the small skull candles he had in the room were the only light. "Shut up," Ryland said as each of the players put their hands on the planchets at the center of the Ouija board. "When I give the word, the time will begin," he added as he stood near the door and focused on me. He said the code word and the phrase. "We invite the spirit of Sawyer Aldrich." Immediately, the timers on their phones started. Ryland didn't blink as he asked the first question. "What is the name we need?" I closed my eyes as a tear streaked down my face. The trio surrounding Nick and I spelled out the name. D-E-X-T-E-R. "Are you the culprit?" Their planchets rested on yes. I was trying my best to resist. The air felt thick as I realized the inevitable was happening. It was reading my mind. "What did you do?" A-C-C Ryland's face scrunched up as his girlfriend gave him a dirty look. "You gotta be more specific," she told him. "He has to use the script," Todd corrected her. Ryland repeated the question. I did my best to avoid what he was trying to get me to do. M-I-S-T-A-K-E. "This isn't working," Daisy grumbled and took out a small pocket knife from her back pocket. My eyes widened, and before I could stop her, she stabbed me right in the side. "Jesus Christ," Val said, covering her mouth. "Answer the question correctly," she shouted to me as she twisted the knife in. The tape kept me from screaming. Nick was so zoned out from smoking he didn't even notice. Ryland repeated the question. I looked at Daisy, knowing what she would do if I lied again. K-I-L-L. This time they were satisfied. I looked down at the phone. 13 minutes left. Could I stall and prevent them from finishing? "Who did you kill?" I tried my best not to think about it, but the spirits were already guiding their hands. S-A-W-Y-E-R. Val was still covering her mouth, this time looking in disbelief toward me. "No, it can't be true. It can't be." I averted my gaze and Todd told her to focus. Ryland asked the next question, this time focusing on Nick. "Who is the empty vessel?" N-I-C-K. Nick seemed to actually pay attention as the letters spelled his name. "This is some good weed. Almost looks like that really did say my name." Ryland ignored his ramblings, focusing on the next question. "Is he the victim?" The planchets moved, rested on no. "Shall we drain the vessel?" It moved to yes. Nick snorted. "Drain the what? Are you all smoking too?" "We will raise our hands now and offer our force to the spirits," Ryland responded. All three participants with the boards did as they were instructed and let go of their planchets. The timer was down to 9.5 minutes. I was struggling my best, trying to get Nick to do something. Ryland's voice was the only thing that filled the void. "Who is the victim?" S-A-W-Y-E-R. "Is he ready to return?" The planchet moved of its own accord to the word yes. "We give our energies to the transfer." Nick was about to open his mouth, confused by what was going on, when I heard his voice become nothing but a whisper. Then it sounded like he was choking. At the same time, I felt my own throat collapsing. The room was filled with some strange fog, the kind you might see when you barely keep the windows open. Except I knew what this was. I could feel it. My life force was being drained. Nick stood up, grasping at the chair and turning it to me. His eyes were turning black as he lost his air. Todd shoved him back down, and Daisy told him to be careful. Ryland looked at the clock. We were almost down to 5 minutes. "Come," he announced to the void. Then Nick's body went limp. At the same time, I felt something strike me right in the chest. It felt like I was having a heart attack. The trio around the sigil they had created watched and waited to see what would happen. The timer was rapidly running down. Then, behind us, we heard something downstairs. No, Ryland, we gotta hurry," Daisy responded. "I think the power went out," Val realized as she heard people complaining below our feet. There was a sudden low hum in the room. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up as the room became colder. Daisy stood up. "He's here! Sawyer! He's really here!" Rylan was doing his best not to get too excited. We were down to 3 minutes. "All together," he whispered as he reached for his girlfriend's hand and then Todd. Val was the last to form a circle around me and Nick. They chanted the next words together. "This sacred sacrifice we prepare for you, a body strong and young and new, your precious blood taken away. Now we let you see another day. Take what was stolen, return to us, Sawyer. We invite you to this life." Behind Rylan, there was a knock on the door. One of the guests was trying to get his attention. The trio didn't say a word, too focused on their ritual. Down to 2 minutes, I took a chance and screamed under my duct tape. Someone on the other side heard it. Then, opposite of me, I could feel Nick beginning to move again. He stood up, almost robotically, and I could hear a sharp breath exhale from his lungs. Todd, Daisy, and Val all looked like they were seeing a miracle. Rylan stepped into the sigil. "Sawyer, little bro, it's me." He reached for Nick's hand. Nick stopped him before he touched. Then he turned my chair around, and I found myself staring at the jock into his now completely white eyes. Possessed. The timer was almost down to 30 seconds. He pulled the tape from my lips, and I immediately screamed for help. Sawyer, took the pocket knife from Daisy and plunged it into my neck. "Don't you remember what you told me, Dexter? No one is going to care about you." At the same time, the door opened and the guest that heard my screams stepped into the already crowded room. I can't remember what happened next. The timers said just below 10 seconds. The candles went out, the lights flickered on, and someone saw the knife in my neck and started rushing for the possessed Nick. "No, you'll break the spell," Rylan shouted. Too late. As soon as they struck Nick, his body convulsed and he shrieked. The crowd was flung backward. Suddenly the lights flickered and hummed louder as the timer alarms went off. Nick kept convulsing, his bones breaking and his body bending into impossible shapes. He was hardly even aware of the actions, though. An unseen and powerful force rocking the entire house as Rylan frantically tried to keep everything together. "Sawyer, stay with me! Stay with me!" he shouted as he grabbed his brother. The possessed body was still and I held my breath. Then, the screams of 1,000 souls ruptured the area and a cascade of vile black smog burst from Nick's mouth. I closed my eyes and prayed. My heart kept racing. My body felt like it was going to explode as the screams grew louder and the house felt like it was being bombed. I thought about Jessie, how much I loved her and wanted to be with her. I promised myself that if I lived through this, I would tell her everything that had happened that night. Around me, I heard my friends beginning to shriek too, and watched as they held their hands over their ears. I thought about Daisy as I looked at her. All she had ever cared about was making her boyfriend happy. She didn't even know the whole story. She was just here for him. Her eyes bled out. I thought about Val, sweet and innocent. She was probably in the same boat as her sister, trying to make things right when everything had gone so horribly wrong. Her face burned off. I thought about Todd. I didn't even know him that well, but I knew he was just a loyal drone to Rylan. His chest exploded. I thought about Nick. Dummy, bully Nick. The real problem here. The one that maybe deserved to be punished. The one I had covered for. He was still as a stone. I thought about Rylan. Obsession and revenge had driven him this far, and I had ignored it all. I thought everything was forgiven, and we were going to heal together. His body disintegrated. Then I thought about Sawyer. "I'm sorry," I whispered as the spirit choked my life away. And the house was quiet again. I opened my eyes and looked around. Everyone around me was dead except for Nick. The fire from the spirits had also burned away the zip ties, allowing me to move. I shook him away, his normal green eyes returning. I could see he was still high as he frantically saw the dead bodies. "What the hell happened?" "We need to go," I told him. He didn't argue. We stepped past the room to the hallway. The music was still playing, but no one was partying. All the people that Daisy had invited were dead. Some had slit their throats. Others had ripped their face off. Some had just fallen over and collapsed. Every single one of them was dead. I kept hearing Nick cuss as we left, and he pulled out his car keys. The fancy car I had eyed earlier came to life from the alarm. "I'll drive," I told him. In his inebriated state, he didn't argue. I drove out of the neighborhood as fast as I could, thinking how ironic it was that I was behind the wheel of this car now, with this idiot passed out. History was poetry, except this time, I will do the right thing. I reached over to where Nick had his cell phone in the middle console and called Jessie. "Babe, where the heck are you? I'm headed to Ryland's now for the party. Can you wait for me?" My throat closed up, and I let another tear trickle across my cheek. "Jessie, there won't be a party. I'm coming to your place. We need to talk." Local police were called tonight to what was initially assumed to be a noise ordinance violation in the Maxwell gated community. The call originated in the Aldrich residence. Residents of this peaceful cul-de-sac will recall just 1 year ago, 16-year-old Sawyer Aldrich tragically took his own life, jumping in front of a moving car after being a victim of cyberbullying and hate speech by a family friend. In a strange twist of fate, Sawyer's older brother Ryland was found dead tonight, along with over 30 Halloween party guests. Law enforcement has yet to conclude the cause of this incident, but neighbors speculate the very same bully may be to blame. "I saw him. He drove out the neighborhood right after the whole thing went down. He's a sophomore. Thought he was a good kid. Anyway, I'm sure it was him. I recognize that car they drove out with. Same one that struck poor Sawyer a year ago. I'll tell you this, I will never forget seeing that car back up and drive off. I hope he gets jail time for this." A vigil in honor of the Aldrich family is planned for tomorrow evening. I hope you enjoyed the 19-minute Séance by Kyle Harrison as performed by your friendly neighbor, Malcolm Blackwood. If you enjoyed that tale and would love to read more from tonight's very talented feature author, you can help support them by visiting simplyscarypodcast.com/Kyle-Harrison. That's simplyscarypodcast.com/KYLE-HARRISON.
Thanks again for your support of this program and tonight's featured author, as well as all of our authors who provided us with stories tonight. And thank you to Malcolm Blackwood for this evening's tale.
Thank you, and it has been a charming evening here during the Halloween season. I only hope I can return the favor as soon as possible.
Now, before we go, we'd also like to take a moment to thank you personally for joining us for this episode of Scary Stories Told in the Dark. If you enjoyed what you've heard on today's program, please take a moment to stop by our iTunes page or wherever else you listen to your favorite podcasts and leave us a 5-star review and a kind word. It makes a huge difference and would mean a lot to us. If you'd like to hear a premium extended edition of tonight's and all of our other episodes, featuring Twice the Terror, visit simplyscarypodcast.com today and click the Patrons link in the menu at the top of the screen. You'll find yourself at chillingtalesfordarknights.com, where you can purchase season passes for this podcast and our other quality storytelling programs, or become a patron for as little as $5 a month and get access to our entire audio archive dating back to 2012, all of it ad-free. If you happen to use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube, you can follow and subscribe to Chilling Tales for Dark Nights there, where you'll get all of our latest updates and new releases and have the chance to interact with us each and every week. You can subscribe to me on YouTube as well at the Otis Jiry channel, where you'll find releases of my series, Horror Storytime, dating back to 2014. And you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram too. Just search for Otis Jiry. And as for my neighbor, well, stay tuned.
Good evening to you, and with a tip of my hat, I wish you only the sweetest nightmares.
Until next week, stay spooky. Get some sleep, if you can. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to Scary Stories Told in the Dark, a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts Network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com today to learn more about our network and our other amazing storytelling programs. Tonight's program was hosted, and its featured stories performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry. Selected stories have been adapted with the kind permission of their respective authors. Original music provided by Luke Hodgkinson and Jesse Cornett. Sound design and final mixing and mastering provided by executive producer and director Craig Groshek. Program's artwork and logo by David Romero. If you're looking for some fresh tales on a daily basis while waiting for the next podcast, check out my YouTube channel, the Otis Jiry channel, and my extensive collection of narrated tales there. Simply search on YouTube by my name, and you'll find me. And don't forget to subscribe and press the bell notification icon to get my latest releases. Got a scary tale of your own that you'd like performed? I take submissions. Email it to me today at otis@simplyscarypodcast.com to have your terrifying tome considered for production in a future episode of this show. That's OTIS@simplyscarypodcast.com. If you've enjoyed what you heard on tonight's program and are joining us on your favorite podcast app, subscribe to us to be sure you never miss an episode, and leave a 5-star review and a comment. Your feedback means a lot to me. You can also follow Chilling Tales for Dark Nights and yours truly on Facebook to connect anytime and get the latest updates on this and other programs and my channel. If you're listening on the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights YouTube channel, do us a favor and hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon for ctfdn as well to get more spooky tales from me and the crew and another episode of this program each and every Wednesday. And don't forget to hit that thumbs up button to tell us how we're doing and leave a kind word or a request. And don't forget to visit us at chillingtalesfordarknights.com and consider supporting the team by becoming a patron. In addition to helping us out, you'll get exclusive access to our audio archive and ad-free downloads of all your favorite stories, including those you've heard on this program. As for me, I'll be back next Wednesday with more terrifying tales to keep you up all night. But that's all right. Who needs sleep anyway?
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.